Hey, we're down to our last 2 weeks. This is regular class, Monday, May 13th, and this is our last week of actual teaching, because next week is stories. But we'll get to from there. One, you have your last final homework assignment tomorrow and your last final bell work tomorrow. We have our final test coming up this week. We're just getting to that time of year. There is a hat day tomorrow. If you bring $1, then you get to wear a hat. It's to raise money to help fight cancer. Let's see, did the homework, did that, all the important things. NWEA, if you've not done the NWEA yet, then make sure you let me know. We'll get you finished off there. And if you beat your old score, show it to me, and I'll be happy to give you points or candy. Charger challenge, we're going to figure that out, so I'll let you guys know. It's probably going to be next week. And our last homework, once again, if you're taping it in on option 4, make sure you see the directions have changed on that one. You have to bring the tape in with you. If you turn it in late, the directions have changed also. And then, let's see, we sold the fruit by the foot. And then tomorrow we'll probably do both things. We'll do both the giant pixie stick and Laffy Taffy. We'll see what we can do on that one. And I think that's it to there. With our that was thenning, this is nowing. Let's see. Where we guys left off with you guys before. Let's see, we met. Ooh, what Outsiders character did we meet at the school dance? Now, Ponyboy has officially been added to it. Who is Ponyboy friends with? Mark. And who does not like Ponyboy? Angela, but I was also going with Brian. And why does Brian not like Ponyboy?
Because he stole his chick.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't try to steal his chick. Ponyboy just existed, and apparently his chick was just psycho. But, you know, that's the way it's going to be sometimes. We covered that one. I guess not. Why is Angela so angry?
Because Ponyboy doesn't like her.
Tim Shepherd. And who is she related to?
Tim Shepherd.
And
Curly
Shepherd. So both the Shepherds, because they're brothers. And we do get to find out more about her family coming up, too.
They're wild.
What? Yeah, understatement. Mark at the dance. Why does Mark get hit in the head with the bottle? Because of the fight, and he tried to interrupt it and stop it, and the guys badonk-a-donked him on the head, which apparently is not a good badonk-a-donk. Charlie, we talk about what the draft is with you guys?
Yeah,
drafted in the Army. We get drafted in the Army, and then Charlie was supposed to be drafted into the Army, and then before he died, he just found out he did not have to go into the Army. But I'm not sure the reason he gave Brian was real. Because what reason does he give Brian?
His shoulder.
No.
His knee.
No.
His back.
Those were all different body parts. Good job. Had nothing to do with the body part. He told Brian that he had a criminal record. And so he was like, apparently he was like, I don't have to go in. Because that was like right before the whole getting attacked and shot thing. He was like, I don't have to go to the draft anymore. And he's like, what? And he's like, why? And he's like, I've got a criminal record. And he's like, what'd you do? And he's like, I stabbed a kid. Brian's like, okay. And just sort of left alone from there. And then we get to the Texans. The Texans and Brian and Mark. What is it they were doing?
Hustling.
Nice. Who was hustling who?
Brian was hustling Texans.
And why is hustling bad?
Because showing you're bad, but you're really good.
So essentially you're lying because you're pretending you're bad when you're really good at it. So they got a whole bunch of money out of the Texans. And apparently the Texans did not take that real well. That's when they were leaving. They're like, come here kids, and we're going to beat you up. And that's when we find out something happens to Charlie, because Charlie rescues him, and that's when he goes. When they talked about the Texans having the Texans were the ones that had the brass knuckles, and they're like, come here, we're going to beat you up. So I found some more brass knuckle pictures to help you out.
That's the point.
Is that a cup right there?
No, I'm talking about
that one?
Yeah.
I think it's just extra weight. I don't think it's an actual cup.
It doesn't look like it can hurt.
Because sometimes you have ones that look like that.
This kid was just like his knuckles and like, you know, that one movie where like they have those
I think he can hurt someone.
And I have seen people do what are like the really cheap brass knuckles, where you just go out to and you get like a roll of quarters, like they have like in the little roll you see at the bank, and you hold that in your hand, and you just keep a ring on your finger, and it gives you a whole bunch of extra weight, and then the ring will hit them, and you can hit a person that way too. Of course, you hit them too hard, the quarters go everywhere. It's like you're giving them a tip. And the quarters go everywhere, and you're like, here's some change. Yeah.
Can't you just say they're a paper holder?
Sure. You lie to the cops any way you want to, and let me know how that goes
No,
on.
brass knuckles are illegal.
You still haven't told us how you got arrested.
Yes, not next week yet.
I know why.
Shut up.
All right. Now we get to jump to chapter 6. Your homework will be the end of chapter 6 and 7 for tomorrow. Because we're going to get into the big stuff. Now we're into the big stuff happening.
Wait, are we about to work on my homework?
Punch the kid. He got annoyed.
Not yet. We'll read first. Let's see. Because now that we've gotten past the intro-y stuff, we're going to get to our things with conversations. Like tomorrow and Wednesday, a lot of it I want to, and probably Thursday too, not as much reading in class as much as I want to talk about things going on in the book. And so if you've not read, it's not the end of the world, but I'm not necessarily giving away stuff in the book as much as they're bringing up themes and stuff like that that I want to talk about and read with you to help make things make a bit more sense. Chapter 6. The Texans were finally caught and tried. I had to go to the trial to testify. Mark did too. He watched me closely at first. I guess he couldn't forget that by the time the police had showed up at Charlie's, I had been hysterical. He didn't have to worry. I went through the whole trial, calm, collected, numb, and empty. I felt like a tape recorder playing back something it had impersonally recorded. The Texans were sentenced to life after a trial that didn't last as long as I thought it would. I guess because there wasn't any defense. Gesundheit. I didn't feel glad or vengeful or anything. I really hadn't much cared whether or not they even caught those guys. Charlie was dead. Nothing was going to change that. I tried to figure out what made me so shook up about it. I mean, I knew people died, although I still can't see me doing it. My father had died, so I knew that people close to you died the same as strangers did. I guess I just couldn't see standing there, alive, talking, thinking, breathing, being, 1 second, and dead the next. It really bothered me. Death by violence isn't the same as dying any other way. Accident or disease or old age. It just ain't the same. That winter, Mark and me were kind of celebrities because of our involvement in the trial. We were invited to social parties, and we were stared at in the halls, and even the teachers treated us differently. I had just put up with it. Mark kind of enjoyed it. He felt bad about Charlie being dead, though, enough to shut up people who tried to get him to talk about it. Mark and me used to go down to the bar and just sit on the curb across the street and stare at the boarded-up windows. Just sit and stare and not say anything. It's funny how you don't think about people until after they're dead or gone. Mom had to stay in bed for a month, so we were really getting hard up for money. And I got to thinking about what Charlie had said when I asked him for a job. I decided I needed a haircut, clean clothes, and a really big change in attitude. I've told you that I don't like authority. This gives people the impression that I'm a smart aleck kid. I'll admit I'm pretty mouthy. I got to thinking, who's going to hire a mouthy kid who acts like he already knows it all? Hey, even if you do know it all, Mark said one evening while we were sitting on the porch, you don't have to let them know it. That's a very good idea. I grinned at him. We were getting along better lately. He'd given up trying to keep us together the same way as we used to be. I know now this must have been a struggle. Branching off from Mark couldn't affect me so much. I was all wrapped up in Kathy. He was on his own. I didn't know how he spent his time when I was with Kathy. I didn't bother to find out. When you go so far as to get a haircut and iron a shirt, I know you're serious. We're really hard up, ain't we, Brian? Yup. Or hasn't the shortage of food bugged you at all? I don't eat like some people. I'm going to start bringing in some money. You wait and see, buddy. I ain't going to sponge forever. This was the first time in all the years that he lived with us that Mark ever said anything about being dependent on us. I looked at him quickly, and I wanted to say, what do you mean, sponge? We love you. We want you here. And Mark, you're my brother. You've got a right to whatever I've got. I didn't, though. I said, don't be a ding-a-ling. Now, I wish I'd told him how much he meant to us, to me, my mom, how he made us seem more like a family. But I never have been able to say things like that, to tell people I loved them unless it was some nitwit chick I couldn't care less about. So I just gave him a punch on the shoulder. He grinned at me, but absently, like he was thinking of something else. That night, Kathy and I went for a drive. I wanted to tell her about my new approach to getting a job, but before I could, she said suddenly, I think Eminem is smoking marijuana. She sounded worried. I was puzzled. Yeah? So what? She gave me an incredulous look. So what? Have you smoked it? Yeah. You haven't? No. Ah, it ain't much. I'd rather have beer any day. I think a lot of these kids just dig it because it's in. It's against the law and it's supposed to be cool. Me? I don't know. I think it's okay, but it sure ain't worth 5 years in a state prison. You won't smoke it anymore? It was a request, not an order. So I answered, I said I wasn't nuts about it. Kathy still seemed concerned. Did you like it? Did it make you want to try stronger stuff? You mean like acid? No, I can't say that it did, but maybe it affects some people like that. At least that's what I read in the magazines. By the way, you guys know what acid is?
Yeah.
So,
No.
not that one. For those of you who have had your classes with what, PE? You guys did like the different things. So they're going to get in this part where it's going to sort of talk a wee bit about drugs. So you have marijuana, pot, grass, stuff that you smoke, and then they're going to talk a lot about acid, which is a hallucinogen, which is different than pot, which is a relaxinogen. I don't know the different scientific terms. What does a hallucinogen do? Yeah, so it makes you see and hear things that aren't really there. And acid by itself is the official name is LSD because it stands for lysergin acid, some long scientific name. And what it does is essentially it is an actual acid that you take by just like, when I was a kid, they'd always like show on the news, they had like these little pieces like stickers and stuff like that. It was like a piece of paper. And then you just literally just, and you put it on your tongue and it dissolves in your mouth. Like those, now they have like those breath strips that you put in your tongue. Like, that same thing, except at one time it's like a breath strip. You like that, you're like, woo, puppies. And you put it in your mouth and it would dissolve in there. And what it is, it's an actual acid. And it goes into your spinal column, that thing that runs up and down your back. And it goes in there and basically just starts like messing with the little wiring that goes to your brain and just replugging in different stuff. And it causes you to see and hear things that aren't actually there. It basically reconnects all of your 5 senses. Your hearing, taste, smell, touch. Sight, thank you. There's 5. And so it makes it so that you can see and hear things that aren't actually there. And it's going to play a role coming up later in the book because there's a character who takes it and then you sort of see what happens to them as they go along that path. Yes.
Did Native Americans take that to like when they on like a special trip?
They didn't take LSD because it's new, but they took what was called peyote or mushrooms, which was a natural hallucinogen. And it's sort of like, if you know, like The Simpsons, or like that, there's a toad that's down like South America who has sweat that comes out of the toad does the same stuff. Like literally, it's like a frog. You can just pick up and go, and you lick the back and you go, and like it does the same thing to your brain. And so LSD is where basically they took like frog sweat and then figured out how to do it without licking frogs. Because apparently licking frogs is weird.
Some people, like, they trick you, they like, hey, take this like breast mint, and they're like, it's like, it'd kind of be weird because people would see, like, not see the paper, so they wipe it.
When I was a kid back in the 80s, that was the big fear they put out there, that was what people were doing. The thing is, it never actually happened. It was just like the fear-mongering that you see sent around, like emails and stuff like that. That people just talked about it happening, but it never actually happened. Like, most people who have drugs want to hold on to the drugs themselves and not just give them out to random kids. It's weird. Those drug people. Anyway, like acid. There you go. Kathy sat back with a sigh. But it's different with you, Brian. You're smart enough to enjoy yourself without artificial stimulants. I didn't say anything to this, but as I never turned down compliments, she continued. But Eminem, he's so trusting. If he's running around with people who give him grass, he'll take it. If someone handed him LSD and said, hey, this is groovy, he'd say, okay, and take it. I worry because before Eminem always seemed so happy at home. He never seemed to need anything else. But lately, he's gotten so much grief for his hair and some of his ideas. I wish Daddy would leave him alone. Eminem isn't happy at home now, so he goes other places. I don't know where. I don't even know his friends anymore. You love him a lot, don't you? I said, vaguely jealous, feeling a mild form of whatever it was that Mark felt about Kathy. Sure, don't you? Kathy said, amazed at the possibility that someone might not love simple, brilliant, trusting Eminem. Yeah, I said, because at that moment I loved anything that Kathy loved because I loved her. I did. I mean, I thought it was corny. Love is always corny to anyone not experiencing it himself, and even now to me it was corny, but I couldn't help it. I thought about all the times I had said I love you to girls I didn't love, to some I didn't even like, and it had been so easy. And now I couldn't even look at her for fear she could tell somehow. It was really weird. I think you would be a good influence on him, like Kathy was saying, and I realized I hadn't heard a thing she'd been saying. I know what, she continued. Let's pick up him and Mark and go get a Coke over on the Ribbon. Okay, I said. The last thing I wanted just then was to be alone with her. I could easily say something really dumb. By the way, when he says I could say something really dumb, do you know what dumb thing he's talking about?
I love you.
There you go. No, the fact that he's going to actually have emotions. And you don't want chicks to know you like him because that's just bad news. We picked up Mark pretty quick. He was walking home from Terry Jones's house. We had to hunt and hunt for M&M, but we finally found him in the bowling alley. The Ribbon was a 2-mile stretch of hot dog and hamburger stands, drive-ins, and supermarkets over on the west side, close to where the Socias lived. At night, the parking lots were filled with kids sitting on their cars and waving, watching, and yelling at other kids driving by. You could drive up and down the street looking at people, or park your car and look at people. The cops sometimes came along and told everyone to get back into their cars, but the cops were mostly guys who'd been patrolling the Ribbon for a long time. The kids had worn them down by being pleasantly smart-aleck and smilingly uncooperative, so unless the kids were openly smoking grass or fighting, the cops were content to sit in the cars with them and yell rude things to chicks driving by. It was a great place to go to pick up chicks. If you followed a carload of them around for a while, they might pull over and exchange phone numbers with you. Everyone in town went there to see who was going with who and who had what car. If you found someone you wanted to drive around with, you parked your car and left it while you goofed around with maybe a dozen different people in one night. Just the driving up and down was a blast. There have been all kinds of editorials in the paper about it because a lot of pushers took advantage of the filled parking lots and quite a bit of grass and money exchanged hands there, but mostly it was harmless. Fights down on the Ribbon had really died off in the last year. It had gotten pretty safe, except for drag racing, which caused a wreck or two a week. You guys know what pushers are?
Yeah, like
The people who push drug dealers. And so they were talking about the fact that apparently as the issues have been a lot of drug dealers. With the idea of the Ribbon. Might not be a thing you're super familiar with, but it was really popular back in the day, even all the way up to when I was a kid. And the idea being is before we had social media, you sort of had to hang out with people to sort of get your interaction. And what you would do is you'd go down to the downtown and you'd drive around in your car. Just basically a long strip of road like in the middle of town, and you would just drive back and forth. Which sounds boring until you realize everyone else driving on the road was a bunch of other kids too. And as you went by, you'd wave to them and do the whole flirty flirt thing. And if you were in a car of dudes and there was a car of chicks and the flirty flirt went back and forth, then you'd like turn around, like try to chase each other on the street, like not drag racing, but just like fall behind them and be like, hey, how you doing? It was enough that I used to even do it back in my day. We went down to Indianapolis. If you guys ever been to Indy, they have the Circle. That's like the thing that you can drive around. When I was a kid, that was the place you'd go down there and you'd go cruising down there. And you'd go down to the Circle and you'd just sort of like drive around in circles or get off a little part and you'd come back onto it and you'd like wave at people and all that. It was great until someone got shot. And then Mama Brovicast said no more doing that. She's like, it's all fun and games. If someone gets shot, you cannot go down there anymore. And so we can no longer go cruising down in Indy. So we found a new place to cruise up in Twttin, Indiana. And Tipton's way up north in hillbilly country. And we went up there once because it was weird because people were actually cruising in tractors because it was like out in the boonies. And so we were like, we found this strip like, oh, look at all these kids. We'd cruise back and forth like, what's that? Is that a tractor? And there were kids like in their like monster trucks and stuff like that. We're like, I don't think these are our types of people. And there are lots of overalls and things like that. So not to be judgmental, but we decided that was not our area. So we had to give up cruising when I was in high school and it was awful. But apparently, back in the day, it was a thing. All right. Boy, I hope I see someone I know, Kathy said. Here I sit, surrounded by beautiful boys. She gave me a teasing grin. Mark raised his eyebrows. Well, If you feel that way about it, he put his arm across her shoulders. We were sitting pretty close together because all four of us were in the front seat. Kathy was next to me, Mark on her other side, and Eminem was hanging out the window, gravely watching people, waving if he was waved to, yelling back if he was yelled at, always slightly surprised at the crudity of the calls, as if he hadn't heard the same things 100,000 times before. I put one arm across Kathy's shoulders, too. She beamed. It's so nice to feel wanted. A couple of blondes in an orange Camaro came by on Eminem's side of the car, made him an indecent proposition. I thought the kid was going to fall out the window, he was so shocked. The rest of us just laughed. The ribbon was a 2-lane street with an extra lane at the traffic lights for left turns. When we stopped at the light, we were in the middle lane with cars on both sides of us. The blonde chicks in the orange Camaro were on our right, and they were still talking to Eminem. I didn't catch much of the conversation, but Mark did, and he was talking to them too, trying to see around Eminem, who took up a lot of the window. On our left was a green, out-of-sight Corvette with a couple of guys in it waiting for a left turn signal. That's the kind of Corvette they're going to be talking about here in a moment. No. They look like real snobby guys. You can tell just by looking that some guys are snobs, especially ones with Corvettes. The one on the passenger side glanced over at us and, I still don't understand why, popped off with a really obscene remark. I sat stunned for a minute. The thought of Kathy hearing such a thing just froze me. Then, so quick, I didn't even realize what was happening. Mark reached past Eminem, opened the door, pushed Eminem out of the way, ran around to my side of the car, and punched the foul-mouthed guy in the nose, literally smashing his nose in. It was their turn to be stunned. Before they could move, Mark was back in the car. He jumped into the back seat and yelled, "Take off!" The light turned green, so I stepped hard on the accelerator. The Corvette was supposed to turn left, and all the cars behind it were honking, so they had to turn left. I thought maybe they'd come after us. I mean, they were older guys, maybe 18 years old, but they didn't. We drove up and down the ribbon without seeing them again. "Oh, you're a fast worker," Kathy said. I wondered if she was mad at me because I hadn't been the one to punch that guy. She was my girlfriend. I should have done it. I was halfway hacked off at Mark for showing me up. Real quick, why did Mark punch the kid?
Because he made fun of Kathy.
Basically, the guy said a thing that, using curse words and nasty things, probably said something about her being a girl and what she can do, and so said something really mean and awful, so bad that Brian was like, "What?" And, of course, Mark's not one to just sit there, so instead of being shocked, what does Mark do?
He sounded like
Yeah, just goes out there and is like, breaks the kid's nose, and then jumps back in the car, and then they take off.
Wait, what happened to Eminem?
Eminem was just probably sitting. Eminem was busy flirting with older girls, so Eminem was just like, "Life is great," because the girls were flirting with him, and Eminem was like 13, and he was just like, "Hugga, hugga, hugga," and that's when then Mark pushes him out of the way and punches the kid. And Mark's like, or Eminem was like, "I don't understand what's happening." Teenagers. All right. I was halfway hacked off at Mark for showing me up. "Well," Mark said in a mock serious voice, hanging over the front seat, "I get these impulses." "Impulses to jump out of cars and hit people?" Kathy said dryly. And I realized she didn't think Mark was a hero for what he'd done. As a matter of fact, she didn't think too much of it at all. "They hit us first," Mark said, sitting back in the seat. "A hit don't have to be physical. I couldn't hit them the way they hit us without hitting you too." I'd always known that, in spite of his lousy grades, Mark was every bit as smart as I was. But it was still surprising whenever he proved it to me. Kathy was quiet. Then she turned around and looked at Mark for a long time. "I never know what to make of you, Mark. Why make anything of anybody? Why not just take people or leave them?" Mark was in a funny mood. I could tell. I had seen him in that mood before. He was never that way with me, but I'd seen him suddenly turn on people like a teased lion who'd had enough. I remember the night Charlie was killed. Mark grabbing up the shotgun and firing away. I don't think I could have done that, even if I had known Charlie was dead at the time. "I don't like being analyzed, baby," Mark said, "so don't." I couldn't tell him to lay off because he had a point. Kathy did like to turn everyone inside out and look at him. It didn't bother me, but I could see where it might bug some people. I'm sorry, Kathy said, even though she wasn't. I had to say something, so I said, let's get a hamburger. We turned into a big drive-in called Jay's, which was always crowded. It was a setup with a stall for each car and a little deal that had a menu and a button on it. You pushed the button and a voice came out of the deal and said, "Order, please." And you told the speaker what you wanted. In this case, it was 3 hamburgers, 1 steak sandwich, and a cherry pineapple 7-Up and 3 Cokes. And about 10 minutes later, a chick appeared with the food. It was actually slightly spooky. Real quick with that thing that they're referring to there. That's the drive-in restaurants where you have like the Sonic stuff like that, where you park and they bring the food out to you. That's the kind of thing they were talking about, that one. When Mark said that I couldn't hit them back without also hurting you, do you know what he's referring to?
You can hit them with words.
Why? Because if he hits them with words, what happens?
They're going to fire back.
No.
Kathy's.
Because if he goes and says something really nasty to them, everyone around can hear it. He was like, what they did was inappropriate and I had to teach them a lesson. But if I said something really mean and nasty to them, you would hear it and Eminem would hear it. So how else am I supposed to teach them a lesson without being able to use words? So that's why Mark says I jumped out and did it. Brian and Mark, by the way, used to get along really well, but something is coming between them.
They both like Kathy.
And Kathy's coming between them. Now have you returned your books over yonder? Chapters 6 and 7, big things are happening with our characters, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow.